fine? All right, so we're going to be talking about ProxyLogon. Okay, so ProxyLogon, first off, let's talk about what is it? What is this particular vulnerability? So in short, this vulnerability is an exploit that takes advantage of, it's a chain of vulnerabilities. Specifically, there's 4 different CVEs related to this particular attack. And this particular one, it starts, the initial attack has to do with some deserialization that Microsoft, through Exchange, has had for years. There's also a server-side request forgery is probably the biggest issue here, and a couple other issues that allow us to do arbitrary file uploads, file writes to really any directory that we want on the system. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what that looks like and how that was done. So in short, what happened is that in late 2020, an individual named DevCore had been poking around inside the software, specifically the Exchange software, and had noticed some interesting pieces, some interesting functionality of the Exchange server. Most specifically, that they noticed that small little commands could be injected to change the way that the application was, that the front end of the Exchange servers were communicating with the back end. In short, let's go ahead. Let's take a little bit closer look at this. Let's pull this guy up on the screen so you guys can see what I'm talking about. All right. Okay, so here we are, and we have what we have here is we have the actual front end systems. We have web clients coming in, mobile devices, Outlook, POP3, you name it, even telephony, that allows all for this unified communications, unified messaging to come in. And so through that, there is some client access pieces, some services that are used to be able to make those communications possible. Now, what we're looking at specifically today is this front end versus back end, so client access versus back end. And here there is an HTTP proxy. So by default, Exchange, when installed, listens on port 443 on IIS. That's the web server. That's how you connect. That's how you get to, let's jump back to here. That's how you get to here. So that's on port 443. Okay, great. So now we need to talk about, okay, so you're on port 443. What else can you do? So to be able to talk to the back end, IIS is also listening on port 444. So this allows a proxied connection where we are actually able to communicate from the front end to the back end, and this proxy will do a lot of the work for us to be able to facilitate those communications. And what was found, and here we have another image for you. And what we found, let's pull this guy up in front. All right. And what we found is that, so this particular port could be taken advantage of, that you could change whatever you want. And this is the regular normal IIS bindings, so that we can actually come in here and have a look at what's going on. So back to here. So specifically, what happened is that it was determined that there is a deserialization bug that happens back here on the back end, that when data is pulled in through a base64 decoder, that this is one of the vulnerabilities that through the unified messaging services, that the deserialization bug can be taken advantage of, and you can be able to process or send malicious commands to the unified messaging systems. Now, additionally, there is the server-side request forgery, which is probably the better known vulnerability here. And this is where we actually are allowed to come in and steal canary tokens, be able to steal valid session tokens, and be able to perform a couple different pieces. So in here in a moment, we're actually going to go over what does that look like. So I've got a couple different pieces that I wanted to share with you. And so another question is, well, a lot of folks are going to be asking, well, am I vulnerable? am I vulnerable to this particular attack? So Microsoft has done this great job where they've put out a security bulletin, including a ton of extra helpful information on finding this information, on knowing if you're vulnerable to specifically to this vulnerability. There is a Nmap script that can be used. There are some mitigation scripts that can be used to help mitigate this without actually applying the patch. Of course, we do encourage that you actually apply the patch onto the system to be able to move that forward. Great. And so with this tool, this is actually fantastic. It talks a lot about how it works, how you can further identify these particular CVEs to see if they're there, and some mitigation strategies. So, and this all runs fairly quickly. Let's talk about tons of information here, and I'm going to drop this in the chat so you guys can see that and see what I'm talking about. I'm going to drop that right there. Okay, so you should see that here in a moment. Great. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I do want to go have a look at this guy. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and save this file. All right, give me a moment. And we're going to get this pulled up. Okay, so it's kind of cool how this functions. All right, so in short, you can run the script to be able to see if your systems are vulnerable. And down here, before we get to our demo, we're actually going to look at, okay, so there's a couple pieces. They're looking for the version number to see if the version is vulnerable or not. There's specific versions that are vulnerable that you do need to be aware of. So anything prior to these versions that you see here. This also correlates with the cumulative updates that Microsoft has put out for Exchange servers. So definitely, if you have a chance, take a moment to have a look at those and see, are you up to date on your latest cumulative update? So, but really, let's talk about the server-side request forgery. This is the bigger issue. This is the one that a lot of damage can happen from this particular CVE. So specifically, the CVE we're talking about today is 2021 2680 or 855. So this guy does a couple different things, and what he's going to do is he's going to set a path for this OWA auth x.js, and it doesn't really matter what the .js comes across. It could be x, it could be xxx, it could be really anything. It needs to be a static resource. What was found is that during the checks, and we're going to dig into this real deep, but during the checks for this, if a backend resource cookie was applied and a static file was requested, then it didn't really matter that the system would go ahead and proxy the request and would allow us to be able to send information, basically be able to do a server-side request forgery using this information right here, this backend resource. The BE resource stands for backend resource. So by providing that cookie and providing this information, we are able to take advantage of this. And so this Nmap script effectively will connect to your Exchange server. It will connect, it will set this path, and it will try to connect to this and provide these cookies right here and to see, well, did we get a valid response? So it'll help us be able to determine if there is a real vulnerability or not there. Okay, so that's a little bit how it works. That's how to determine if you're vulnerable. I definitely encourage you guys to check out this link. I put it in the chat here. Definitely, when you have a moment, go take a look and find more information on that. Okay, so a little bit more to those that are responsible for defending their networks. Okay, so let's talk about CISA. So CISA has put out an excellent review. This has been updated as of March 31st. So tons of information in here that I would encourage you to take advantage of, to have a look through this information. They have plenty of information on the IOCs. So to determine if you have been, to help you determine if you have an active web shell or any kind of active connection on your system or any presence that there has been. For example, the majority of this attack, the server-side request forgery, allows individuals to steal these tokens to be able to then perform the arbitrary file writes, which is a separate vulnerability entirely. And so some of the more common web shells that we've seen is this China Chopper web shell. So you will see that. You also see a couple locations where these are being used as targets. So once the file is arbitrarily written, we have to be able to access it. And that access is done with a post request. That post request, it has to be done with a post request to be able to retrieve it. And these are some of the common locations that you're going to see coming across that we've seen in several different pieces. And most specifically, if you have the ability, if you have Exchange logs, server logs, the one thing that you really want to look for is this guy right here. So the set offline address but virtual directory information where the external URL is being set. So what this means is that this is where the vulnerability is actually occurring. So where file writes are occurring. So if you have the ability to review your systems for IOCs, whether your NetFlow data, syslog data, or even the Exchange servers themselves, definitely look and see, are any, over the last 2 to 3 months, since this vulnerability became known, it was first spotted in the wild in January of this year, but it became public knowledge in March of this year. So really, in the last 2 to 3 months, you should be looking in your records to see, do you have any information that shows this external URL? Do you see any paths where people are trying to connect to that? Additionally, if you see any requests to a, back here, if you see any requests to, let's go get to a JavaScript file that exists in here. Now, there's no JavaScript file or anything in here that you should be able to access in this particular folder. So if you see that coming across, you know that there are active attacks that are, or at least somebody's trying to be able to take advantage of that. So let's get back to here. And there's a ton of information here. Lots of IOCs available. I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat as well so you guys can see this information. So this is definitely a resource I would encourage you to go take a look at. Okay. Let's do one more where we're talking about what's at stake here. So Palo Alto has an excellent article over what this looks like. I will go ahead and drop this into the chat as well. And so here in a moment, once we're done talking about what to look for, how does it work, let's actually, well, do the exploit. So we're going to jump into that. Okay, so down here, lots and lots of information. Of course, they're talking about using their tools, but they do talk about what you would see, what type of activity you would see if you've been compromised. So the main piece is that if you see connections coming through to this front end OWA auth redirect suite server proxy.aspx, or any random named files in here, or files with strangely named pieces, these are common files that are being created via the exploit. Now, these do have to be accessible to the web root. What I mean by that is once I place a web shell on your system, I need to be able to go back and be able to retrieve it with an unauthenticated session to be able to actually access that. So we are able to use this server-side request forgery to arbitrary file upload to be able to write these files. And at that point, now we can start posting. We can start sending commands to these web shells that have been created. And these are some of the common web shells that we've seen. I've even done some of these myself. So some really neat pieces that can be done. Let's see, there's a couple more pieces in here. Okay, so essentially look for any written ASPX files, look for any suspicious processes that have been created, especially in this time frame, or any processes that Exchange actually started the process. If you see any activity like this, that you know that there's likely to be a problem. If you see any SC or net group or some unusual SSH, or definitely check your ARP cache to see if you see unusual communications coming in. There's a ton of things that we can do. Definitely spend some time at this link to have that better understanding of what's going on here. Okay, and one of the most successful payloads, I do want to talk about this, is this guy right here, is the Nshang one line PowerShell reverse shell. That's a mouthful to get out, but this is an attack that, definitely we do know that this particular attack works. This one line right here allows for reverse shell, so for folks to be able to connect. Now, another thing that you can do, so I'm going to zoom in here, so you can do the search on your system to look to see have any PowerShell commands been written. The one that you're specifically looking for here, let's find my spot, is this IEX, so invoke expression. So what you're looking for here is to find a situation where PowerShell has been invoked on the system. And so this is another possible indicator of compromise. So we do have a system here that you can take a look at these locations. Go ahead and get authenticated. So this is an Exchange server I have here, and we're going to use this for our demo purposes here in a moment. So you can come in here, and you definitely want to spend some time looking in the client access locations. Specifically here, that if you see files that have been dropped here, that is a good indicator that information has happened. This is one of the, on some of the exploits that have been developed, even though they're still a bit rudimentary, the majority of them will drop their files in here. So you'll see .js files as an attempt to upload those, but you'll also see these ASPX files where that's actually occurring. So, okay, so we've talked a lot about where to look, or what is it, what happened, are you vulnerable, and how does it work? So, okay, now we're going to jump really into the meat and potatoes of things. How does it work? So I really want to go much deeper on the how does it work piece. Okay, so give me one moment as I get some new pieces ready for you. Okay. And again, if you guys have any questions at all, definitely check out the chat. There's plenty of information there that you guys are welcome to spend some time in. Okay. So let's talk about the arbitrary. Well, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's see it in action. So to do that, let's go over to my Kali box. Now there are some known payloads that have been created, some web shells as well as payloads that can be used. The community is actually doing a really good job of minimizing those that are available, those that allow script kiddies to get up and running. There are a couple that are a little bit better fleshed out, but the community has actually done a remarkably good job of providing the material for educational purposes rather than providing the material that can be used to be taken advantage of. Okay, so let's actually see it in action. So we have our Exchange server. We know he's running on 192.168.0.33. So we have an Exchange server here. So this is our Kali box. He's talking to Exchange server. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've set up a burp listener. So we can actually see this traffic come across. So I'll hit refresh, and you should see new traffic coming across. There we go. Okay, so we have new traffic. We're actually able to see this traffic coming across. Now I find that the proxy, if you are trying to do this yourself, that oftentimes that the filters will cause you issues that you won't be able to see all the information coming across. One easy way around that is to use Logger++. It does a great job of being able to actually see everything that's coming across. So we're going to use this to our advantage and be able to have a deeper look and see everything that's happening. Okay, so let's go look at our tool here. Let's go ahead and clear that out. Okay, so I have a tool here called ProxyLogon. So let's go ahead and look in this folder. So I'm going to go ahead and have a look at this file here. So really, I'm going to close this and then just open it again. ProxyLogon.python. Okay. So there's a lot of information here. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit, if it will allow me. And that's all right. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this and it's coming through just fine. Okay, so in short, this is a tool that is available to the internet, that is available to anybody that wants it. Now let's talk about a little bit of what's happening here. Okay, so we are setting a couple different pieces. So we're going to set the name of the shell. This is the file that we're going to create, the arbitrary file right that we're going to use. Now we're going to set a user agent. The user agent, as far as my testing shows, doesn't really matter. we're going to talk about the path at which we're going to actually place these things. Remember how we talked about front end, HTTP proxy, OWA, auth? So that is a place that this particular script is going to be placing these payloads. Okay, and we've got some pathing information that we're going to use and hand that, and we have our actual payload right here. So this is a payload that can be used. So this payload right here is we're effectively injecting a JavaScript piece that will respond to post data. And what it will do is that we'll evaluate that request based on the data that's sent to it via the post request. And all safety checks are turned off. And it will pipe that information back out to the screen because we're running JavaScript. So that's everything that's happening in the background on this ASPX file that we're going to be uploading. So just checking the comments. Okay, so we're going to perform an auto discovery at a certain point, and we've got a couple different pieces coming across. Okay, so in short, what we're going to do is we're going to send a request to the server name. So the server name right here, this is our target, the ECP, and then a random name. So we have a random name generator in here that, here we go, ID generator, and it just gives us 3 random letters .js. So it allows us to keep cycling through not an unlimited number, but it doesn't have to be 3 letters. It can be 2 letters. It can be 100 letters. It doesn't really matter how long the resource is. The important piece to look at here is the cookie. So the cookie is asking for a backend resource, and we're going to ask for localhost, and we're going to place this piece right here. So what this does right here is allows us to be able to do a server-side request forgery that allows us to skip, to be able to break the connection and effectively be able to perform a break and between the parsing, I should say. So we're actually parsing it. So this is a host that we're going to be looking at, and this, once the string is broken, once the parsing is broken, actually relates to, and it took me a while to get an answer to this, it actually relates to the version of Exchange that we're communicating with. So by sending this particular number right here, and you can use previous numbers, there's a list of numbers that will work. So if the version's too new, that we're effectively not taking advantage of, or we're switching to a request that does not require Kerberos authentication. And this piece right here allows us to skip that if we say that we're an old enough client and that we can't perform that particular authentication. So it allows us to get past that. Okay, so, and we're going to look for our local host. So I have another image ready for you guys. Let's pull this one into view so you can see what I'm talking about. And of course, now you can't see what I'm talking about. Okay, let's get back over here. Figure out where my thing went. Sorry for the trouble, guys. There we are. Okay. So if you guys look right here, so what we're effectively doing is we're asking for the Exchange control panel. We are sending for a static resource. So it can be an icon file, an FTL file, a JavaScript file, CSS file, it doesn't matter what it is. And so what we're trying to do here is by sending this cookie across backend resource, and we can set the request that we're looking for. Okay, so here we can show that we are sending, we are looking for example.org. So by sending that to the server went out and tried to get to example.org. Can't reach it, doesn't know who that is. And here's that tilde symbol. So the tilde symbol allows us to separate the request, to break the request, and to not have any additional information out here. So that allows us to take advantage of that. All right, so let's get another piece here in front of you. I'll find my spot again. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this now. Okay, so what we can do is that we know that by communicating here, that by providing this information, that we're able to actually communicate. And you know what? Let's before we look at that, let's do it live. I promised you guys we'd do it live, so let's actually do it. So our last request is 49. Let's go actually process a request. Okay, so let's do proxy chains, Python, ProxyLogon. Okay, now there's two pieces of information you have to be able to use one of these scripts, and I'm encouraging you to take a look at how the script works, how the payload works. Don't just blindly pull any of this information. And if you do find evidence that a system is vulnerable, well, you should report it. You should let those individuals know. It should be patched immediately, because this vulnerability does allow for the internet to gain access, remote code execution onto servers, and be able to just cause an absolutely devastating attack. So it allows us to do this. So we're going to go ahead and run this. All right. So we've got some information here. Okay. So let's look at what happened here. Okay. So we made a request. We made a request for this backend resource here. Blow that up a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see that just fine. Definitely say something in the chat if you're having difficulty seeing that. Okay, so here we've asked for this backend resource. We said, I want to get the local host, and then we have our break right here, which actually stops the backend from being able to process this information, continuing to process this information. Yes, okay. So it'll respond with a 500 error, and it will do this little interesting little thing where it will drop the server name. It will say, well, who's the front end server? And it will give us this information. It'll also drop the backend target information. And so this X calculated is the initial indicator that the server-side request forgery can be used. So we can take advantage of this where the server accidentally leaks some of its additional information. Now, the backend server is not always going to say localhost, and nor is it always going to say the actual internal FQDN of that server. So in this case, we did actually pull that information. Okay, so let's continue with what we have going here. Okay, so now we're going to send a request here. So now, okay, so it's the same basic thing. We're still trying to post to this randomly generated JavaScript file, and we're going to ask for the backend resource for server. And now we're going to make a request for the autodiscovery, autodiscover.xml. And again, we're going to break it with this information right here. So we're sending across that same information, and we're saying, okay, pull this information. And then, excuse me, let's make sure we're highlighting the right thing. Pull this information. I want you to do a request and server-side request forgery. Pull this information, send it back to me. Next, again, break it and use this version information so it skips the authentication check. So then in this post request, well, we have to have the body. So this is a legitimate URL that will respond to us, that we can get to that, and we need to send it information. So we're using a post request to push information to it. And we're going to send our email address. We're going to say, I'm going to say, I want to connect to administrator at billybobinc.local. And I want to use this particular schema. Okay, so the server is going to come back. And so the server is going to add a lot more information. So the server has performed the lookup for us. This is bad. This is really bad to be able to do this. There's a bunch of information here, but the most important thing that we can see in here is that we have a legacy distinguished name information. So this is information that's only available internally. This is Active Directory information being exposed. So we know the users, Billy Bob. We know what Exchange administrative group he's using. We know the recipients. We've got all this extra information. So this is bad. We're able to take advantage of this and continue on. Okay, so moving on to our next portion of the exploit. All right, so now we're going to send another post request. So we've got some request IDs plugged in here. These are important that you do have these X request ID, request content, or excuse me, request type. That I found that the client application didn't seem to matter as long as it thought it was communicating with Outlook. And we've pulled some information from that, and we're going to communicate with the administrator at the server on, remember how we talked about the back end communicates on port 444. So we're going to try to bind, we're going to proxy through. So the IIS listening on 443 will take this and proxy it to 444. We're going to try to talk to MAPI, Exchange mailbox information. We're going to pull some mailboxes for what we pulled from before. So I'm going to highlight this, and what you'll be able to see as we go back, put this in here. Oh, okay. I apologize. I think this one is that's always the same. It's this one. Excuse me. Sorry. Got mixed up. Okay. So here we go. There we go. So that's that same information. If we look in our request 52, so I am making a request that I'm trying to authenticate as Billy Bob on this information. Now, there is right here. So if you notice, I wish I could zoom in on that. There's like a weird little A symbol here. What's going on there? So this is important. Let's go open our piece right here again. Okay, so a couple different things I want to look at, and let's find our spot. Okay, so right here we have our legacy DN. So he's trying to pull this information. Now, what happens is that we have appended this this hex code to the end of that connection. I am still trying to get to the bottom of how this hex code works. Microsoft is actively trying to prevent folks in taking down information that discusses how this particular code works. But we're sending across this MAPI body as part of the data, so it gets appended to the end of it. So it's our legacy DN, distinguished name, plus this hex code right here. I would love to be able to describe a little bit more about what this hex code is doing. I don't at this time have a strong understanding, but when you intercept it with a proxy, you will see these strange little characters right here that you can't modify, can't do anything with, because burp or most text editors have no idea what to do with that information. So you'll see this information coming across. Okay, so we're going to send this request, and again, we're trying to access a resource. We are doing server-side request forgery, and we're trying to pull this mailbox information. This, you see, it even says lab.local, so this ID didn't matter at all. And again, there's our break, and we have our version number for the Exchange server that we're trying to authenticate with. Now, so this information comes across, and so we get a 200. Okay, great. So we've got a ton of extra information here. But the real piece that we want to look for, and we'll just go ahead and use the search, is the SID. We now have the user's SID. Okay, so that's really bad. So if you can pull an SID, here it is. If you can pull a user's SID, this is exceptionally bad. This allows us to do all kinds of terrible things once we have the SSID. SID. So now we have server-side request forgery, so we can do internal lookups, and we can provide an SID. Okay, so using that information, we can take it a step farther. Okay, so we can do an Ntlm negotiation using that same SID. So here we are. We can even verify it's the same guy. So same guy. So our next request will provide that. And I've noticed that much of these values don't even matter. They don't matter at all. What matters is that we get this in here. So let's talk about where this backend resource is communicating with. All right, thanks, Jeff. We will go ahead and here we go. We'll make this a little bit bigger. All right. Hopefully everybody can see. Okay, let's double check our stream. Sorry, folks. Okay, Jeff, is that any better? Okay, we'll wait. So let's keep going, and hopefully somebody can tell me if the screen's just a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's just make it just a tiny bit bigger for you guys. I do want you to be able to see what's happening here. Woo! Okay, that's huge. All right, so back here. So we have sent the SID. we're trying to communicate with that. Yeah, burp is just notorious for having really small font. Okay, so again, we are posting to this randomly named piece. We have added a header for that SID. So we're trying to get to that mailbox. We're trying to get to that target mailbox. So these are headers you do have to include for this piece to work. You'll see the logon mailbox. You'll see this information all provided. But most importantly, we are trying to talk to the back-end Exchange control panel, ProxyLogon. And right here, again, break that with a version number. So now this ProxyLogon does some interesting things. So the way that this ProxyLogon works is that it allows us to send our communications and to effectively be able to negotiate if we can pull all the information that we need from an account and have the SID and perform an actual Ntlm authentication. And again, make sure that we are using that older version, which skips the authentication check, which is a really big issue. Then we can pull a valid session. So we can actually, Kerberos will respond back and set some cookies for a valid session because of the way this ProxyLogon is designed to function. As long as you have a static file, you're trying to access a static file, post or get, doesn't matter. As long as you have a location that you're trying to access that the server can get to, and as long as you have a version information, then this particular piece works. So you can send this, you could take this request and send it really just about anywhere and be able to take advantage of that. So as long as you have these pieces and you know the SID and you know the server name as well as the username, you can be able to process this on any vulnerable Exchange server out there. And what we'll come across is that it will, with this particular request forgery, we're able to steal valid session information. We're able to pull the session ID and canary token. Canary token is a token that's meant to die very quickly, that is given to us by the ProxyLogon server. So effectively, here's your token, it will die, but it allows us to do some interesting things once we have that token. Okay, so now we're able to actually come in here and start being able to make requests and to work our way around the network via this connection. So we can start sending these requests. Again, backend resource, we need to start connecting to various pieces. We can query the about and provide this information. So now we can access authenticated or pieces that require authentication to be able to access those bits for them to actually be able to function. Okay. And so a lot of this is what we were seeing here, where we're actually accessing these pieces. Now, I'd love, the demo gods were not good to me today. I'd love to show you this in the wild, this particular version, that when we run this, that there is a problem with the information we're getting back, and what specifically this particular Exchange server is responding with a strange request and saying, oh, well, I'm going to redirect you. So here's a 302. I'm going to redirect you to a different location. Oh, I know what that is. The user never authenticated. Aha. All right. So stay with me. I'm going to see if we can clear this issue live. I think we can do this. I think I know what that is. All right. So we're going to go to HTTPS. I bet you I know exactly what that is. OWA. That's fine. Accept the risk. Okay. Billy Bob Inc. / administrator. I know what this is. Okay. There it is. Language selection. We hadn't had logged in before, so we need to do a language selection. That's fine. Just Mountain Time, doesn't matter. Hit save. Great. So there was a redirect on our first time in. Aha. I'm so happy that we know what this is now. So let's go run our exploit again. All right. So we are going to go ahead and run this. Okay, so we're talking to administrator at Billy Bob Inc. Look, now I know this font's really small to see, but just trust me. We're going to go ahead and run this. Perfect. All right, actually shows to be working. Great. That's what we wanted. All right, tons of things are happening here. Oh, I'm so happy that we found out what was happening here. Okay, so what we're going to do, okay, so great. So we've done, I can actually run, who am I? We should get a request coming back here in just a moment. So who am I? PowerShell command or command line that, that we can actually run. And there we go. Look, we have communication. So what, for those that are wondering what just happened, so what did we just see is that we took all of this, and we're going to walk back through this. We just took this information and we passed information all the way through, and we sent, we uploaded a shell.aspx. That shell was back to, let's go back to our piece right here. So gedit ProxyLogon. Okay, remember our shell, that payload is this guy right here. And I really wish I could make that bigger for you. So basically a JavaScript that will run information on the back end of the server and load it back onto the screen unsafely. Okay, that's what happened. So we sent who am I to this to the system. Okay, well we can keep going. There's so much more that we can do with this. So it's back over here. I want to say let's go ahead and get domain. Oops, that's not going to run. It's get AD domain. Get AD domain. Okay, and we can actually see my my bad request go through. Then we can see another request. Sorry. Okay. All right, and so we've got information over here. And if you notice, this information right here looks different. We've got the NT authority system. So what we're doing is we're effectively updating the server and being able to write information to the server. And there's a very specific location where this information is getting written to, and it's this offline address book. So if you follow this right here, so C program files exchange, we're going to copy this. And so we can actually get to that location and be able to see that the file has been updated. And what we're doing is we're writing to that location. Let's go ahead and a couple different things. Okay, so before I get too far ahead of myself, let's walk through it. We ask for localhost. Localhost reveals the server name. We then say localhost, okay, I want you to authenticate and pull this user's information. Server says, okay, gotcha. Here's the Exchange Active Directory, Active Directory information. Then we do a backend resource request for administrator, the server name, 444, this information doesn't matter, and we use that Active Directory information with that special little hex code that I told you guys about earlier. Okay, now we get our SSI, or excuse me, our SID here. We're going to keep going. So we use our SID to be able to perform an Ntlm negotiation. So to administrator, and we get valid session token information that we're able to use into our next request. So now we tell the backend server, okay, I want you to access something that requires authentication. So ProxyLogon does not require authentication, which we saw right here. No authentication was required, but here it was. So back here about ASPX, here's that information again, break the chain. Here's my information. I want you to get this mailbox. The server responds with, well, all kinds of information. So, so we know that our request was valid. It allowed us through. Great. Let's keep going with it. So because we got that 200, we did not get, what I mean by this is we did not, we know we accessed a piece that requires authentication. So that's the most important thing. Okay. So now we're going to use the background. We're going to send a communication. So admin, I know what that is. Okay, so it should say administrator, but the attack still works. And what's interesting is that it doesn't seem to, it just seems to ignore, as long as admin, or as long as it partially matches, that I've noticed that this particular piece still works. So admin works for administrator as well as just admin, so you can shorten it. We give the server name. Now we're going to access Exchange Control Panel, DDI, and there's a lot of information going on about what the DDI service does specifically. I'll let you guys look up that. It's fairly complex to be able to explain. But what we're doing here is we're going to say, I want to access the schema. I want to send in that canary token that we received. Here's my valid ASP.NET session. Here's the canary token again. Okay. So we've sent in all this information, and this is a post request. Again, I'm posting it, which means it's going to take all of this data right here and proxy it to the server on the back end. And I'm sending a bunch of information. Okay, and so right here, so that server file allows us, what we're doing is we're effectively updating the offline address book with some information. And when you update the offline address book, it allows you to do this interesting little thing. I'll pull this out in front. And so what we're doing here is we're modifying this. So that reset virtual directory, we're able to set a log location and go write it. The vulnerability in play is that it never actually checks. The server doesn't make any check. So this is our third and fourth, our final exploits that we're taking advantage of. It doesn't check to see if it's actually a text file that's being uploaded, nor does it force us to use a very specific location. So we can write these wherever we want. So this is what it actually looks like if you're walking through the Exchange control panel, where you're actually able to see this information. So let's get back to, okay, so I want you guys to see this. Hold on one moment while I find my spot. There we go. All right. Okay, so what is happening here is that we've created an XAML XAML file, and we've created this file, and there's a bunch of commands in here that the server is going to run and do for, well, resetting the offline address book. And when we actually run that, so there's a bunch of information here, but there's one little piece that we can control. And it's this quote right here. So there's that the information is actually inserted directly in here. And so this XAML file can be updated with whatever we want right here. So if we can write this file anywhere. And so when we actually write this file, let's look at what it looks like. Let's grab the next one. Perfect. Okay, so it's going to look like this. All right, so we've got a ton of information in here. And so this is what that virtual directory ASPX, so we can name it whatever we want again, but it's always going to have this same information. It's going to have that virtual directory, the offline address book information in it. So we'll be able to look at all that information. That's great. So we can control these values, because right here, back on the OAB, when you do it the proper method using the Exchange control panel, you can modify the internal and external URL. Specifically, the URL, the external URL can be attacker controlled. So with that ability to be able to put that, we can choose to write information at this location. So let's see it live. So what we have here is that we are pushing this information to the external URL, and we are trying to access this location, and we drop some information in here, then we drop our script that we talked about earlier. And so all of this information is going to appear in the external URL. Again, that was here. So that it appears in the file. And so now when we request that, so it says, yeah, thanks, I was able to take that, I was able to upload it for you. Great. a little bit more. Yeah, this one's unnecessary. Although this does. Oh, excuse me. This one is necessary. Okay, so again, we're pushing to that same location, and this time we are setting the properties, the parameters where that payload is going to appear. Again, you can see canary token. You can see the ASP.NET session, the canary token. Again, you can see all this information in here. And most importantly, we are setting the location that we want to write that file. So this file will be written to OWA auth shell.aspx. Okay, so back over here. So can I get to that location? Should be able to. Shell.aspx. Now this isn't going to do anything specific at the moment because we really don't have anything going on here. So yeah, we can get it. We can make a request to this location. First off, we did not post any data to it with what we just did. Here, let's look at it this way. I went directly to that location, and we didn't get any information coming back from it. Well, we did, but we did not send information with it. What we really need to do, so we have a GET request. What we really need to do is post information to it, and so I can post all kinds of commands to this. So now we have this. We don't even have to use this weird little shell that we have, web shell here. We can just push directly through here. So let's go ahead and push to the repeater. And we will run our who am I again. Okay, if you notice, there is no information in here that authenticates us. We have created a web shell that does not require authentication to be able to function. And that's the important bit about all of this. No authentication is needed to be able to do anything further. So I can come in here and I can say just run the directory. Just run it right where you're at. It takes a moment. Oh, look at that. So we actually have information on our server. We are able to see who's there, what's happening. So we're running PowerShell commands. And the reason why we know this is because my data equals, we're going to write new ActiveX object. We're going to run a shell, PowerShell command, and we can do this. And then we're going to say and send out this information so we can actually see it live. Okay, let's come back in here. So we want to run dir get AD domain. That's the one I really want to run. Okay, lots of extra information in here. Okay, so we have get AD domain running. We can see the content length has changed. Again, all of this, we are past everything. We are at web shell level. So we're able to run a ton of different things here. And we can actually come in and see, okay, so the server name, DNS root, we can see what Active Directory version. I mean, really any PowerShell command you can think of, we can run here. And while I don't have this guy ready to go, I'm probably going to pause there, but there's no reason why I couldn't take this and encode it, base64 encode it. That's very important that you send, because percentage signs do get removed out of this. So anytime there's a percentage sign, we have one right here. Anytime there's a percentage sign that does get stripped out, I actually found that it oftentimes causes the application to crash, and you have to come in and reset that. But anytime that you have that, so we can just base64 encode it, and then tell this guy to instead of running command, we can do encoded command. So this allows you to actually run your encoded commands. So really, I think I'm going to pause it right there. We've gone on a really deep dive, and you're able to see how we're able to actually get server remote code execution on the server. This is wild that we're even able to do all these things. So my question for you guys, well, really, do you guys have questions? Is there anything further? I'm still actively developing and writing different payloads, trying different things, because the patch obviously fixes a lot of this, adds in a lot of checks, a lot of the places that we've taken advantage of. But I'm actively still producing or trying to produce some payloads for this. I would encourage you to reach out to me if you'd like to collaborate any on those. It's important that that this is for educational purposes, that the systems you are testing, you have authorization to be testing. So in this case, I have control of this particular server. But I do encourage you guys to reach out to me. We can definitely explore this one even further. So, okay. Yes, John Hickman, that's a great point. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to put that on there. John Hickman points out that the Exchange servers are often super privileged in Active Directory. So you generally want split permissioning where Exchange, at a big enough organization, Exchange and the administration of Exchange is split into its own not Active Directory domain, but that Active Directory treats it and isolates it off on its own. So generally, most organizations don't do that. They should do that, but most don't. And so if an organization is not doing that, we are able to run commands that run at the domain level. So we have all these privileges. We have domain level privileges that we're able to take advantage of. All right. So, oh, I'm out of focus. There we go. Okay, so I do appreciate everybody bearing with me. It's my first go through with this particular streaming software. I hope that everything went well. I know that at times the fonts were harder to see. I do appreciate you guys. We are probably going to have, I will post it, the same channels as before, another presentation, either we're trying for weekly, we may be every other week, but I will post this information out and basically create like a small little newsletter if you'd like to know when more of these exploits are coming. I'm sorry, not exploits, when these casts are the shows are coming out. So I really appreciate everybody joining me. I may even have to have John Hickman join me and show me some of the cool stuff he's doing as well. So you guys, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll go from there. And if you have anything, please drop it in the comments here. And you guys have a great day.